This is the Kennedy Gravesite Memorials for President John F. Kennedy and Senator Robert F. Kennedy. The Eternal Flame is a presidential memorial for U.S. President John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated on November 22, 1963. 2 days after the death of President Kennedy, Arlington Cemetery was then suggested by Secretary of State Robert McNamara as a good burial location, and the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, agreed. This site was chosen because the President and his friend, architect John Carl Warnke, happened to visit here months before the assassination, and the President had admired the peaceful atmosphere. This permanent memorial site was not the original burial site used during President Kennedy's state funeral on November 25, 1963. A different location not far from here was used at that time. On the day before the funeral, Mrs. Kennedy requested an eternal flame for the memorial, despite objections from family members. One was hastily created and set up just in time for the service. In 1967, President Kennedy's grave and eternal flame were permanently moved to this location after years of planning and development. The enlarged site was due to the wish of Mrs. Kennedy to inter her 2 deceased children next to their father. She once read that President Abraham Lincoln was buried next to his deceased son, Willie Lincoln, and she recalled her husband's desire to be buried with his family. The process for designing the grave was very secretive. Many famous tombs and presidential burial sites were researched for their design and symbolisms. Over 40 architects, sculptors, landscapers, masons, and liturgical experts were involved in the early stages. There were 2 design inspirations that architect Warnke wanted to reflect. The first was to show the early New England tradition of a simple headstone set flat in the ground and surrounded by grass. The second was to reflect President Kennedy's Catholic faith. President Kennedy is buried with his grave placed in alignment and facing the Lincoln Memorial and Washington Monument. Just down the walkway is the grave of Robert F. Kennedy, who was assassinated on June 6, 1968. An expansion to the John F. Kennedy gravesite was dedicated in 1971 to accommodate Robert Kennedy's grave. Robert Kennedy is buried on the upslope side of the walkway. His burial vault is marked by a slate headstone set in the ground and a white cross, which Robert wanted for JFK's burial marker. His gravesite includes a plaza with a low granite wall similar to the one at JFK's gravesite. It features quotations from famous Robert F. Kennedy speeches and a small reflecting pool. This concludes our tour presentation of the Kennedy gravesites. See the list of other memorials nearby to get directions and start the tour stream once you arrive.